I would like to welcome everyone to this reference model panel about knowledge management with the SBGC. Thank you, SBGC, so much. Thank you for the organization of the event. Thank you for André and Fernando being here, our interpreters, Felipe Pazello e Denise Tipulo. We are going to talk about...
Compartilha minha tela.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Please, and then the backstage, let me share my screen, okay?
Vai ser sobre a relevância.
So, our talk today is about the relevance we have in the reference guide.
Eu sempre brinco, ele é uma bússola, ele é
This reference guide is our compass, so that people can work. And it is a guideline that we have.
Ele serve como esse grande.
This model shows us where we should go with the organizations.
Então a gente começa com a pergunta.
So we are going to start with this question that is in fashion now. What knowledge, where is it?
Convidar o público a responder essa pergunta.
I would like to invite everyone to answer this question with us. There is a chat room opened in menti.com. Please, if you could open the chat room on your browser, or you can scan this QR code and you please answer the question. I'm going to give you a minute so that you can play a little bit with this tool. And I would like to see how the audience thinks about this question. Where's knowledge?
Vamos dar aqui pouquinho, alguns minutinhos para o
pessoal.
So
I'm going to give you some moments so that everyone can vote. In the morning we have used it and everyone is already trained with Menti.
Vocês estão vendo a minha tela aqui?
Do you see my screen here with the results? No, we don't see the results.
Acho que você precisa trocar.
I think you need to change. Okay.
Olha que bacana isso.
See how nice this is?
Vamos dar mais minutinho para as pessoas terminarem.
So I'm going to give you one more minute for you to take the survey.
O legal dessa pesquisa é que você não precisa escolher.
The bright side of this poll is that you don't have to choose just one choice.
Para onde você acha que
you can ascribe different weights, depends on the frequency, depending on your organization, depending on where you work.
Têm considerado que
so as you can see here, most people consider people, teams, and then we have processes and guides, manuals, projects. Yeah, it's getting stronger, but not enough, right? So you won't be able to surpass systems and repositories. Really nice.
Aquecimento para nossa.
So this is a warm-up section before our actual conversation. So now I would like to hear some things from Fernando and André. So which knowledge, where is it? So I invite Fernando and André to join us in this conversation.
Vai lá, André.
André, please.
Vamos lá.
Okay, so let's do it.
O painel fala sobre o modelo de referência.
So the panel talks about the our SBGC reference model.
preparando esse painel foi
So when we were preparing that panel, we wondered, why do we need a reference model?
uma das primeiras questões que surgiu foi essa que o
And one of the first questions that has arisen, is the following.
quando a gente
We find this question really often when we discuss knowledge management.
as organizações
When we talk about this with organizations, institutions,
do conhecimento. Por onde eu começo a
how can I start? How can I start applying KM? And what kind of knowledge do I need to manage?
Está em todo lugar, está na empresa.
Knowledge is everywhere. It is in the organization as a whole. So if I want to manage knowledge itself in the whole company, I would say that managing this kind of knowledge is tough. It's going to be tough to know where you can start from. So one of the things that we have to do when we think of knowledge management is identifying what knowledge is that. So what knowledge we can work on.
Eu lembraria de duas coisas importantes que a gente
There are two things that we have to bear in mind.
Uma delas é qual conhecimento da
The first question is, so which knowledge of the organization must be tackled? And the second question is,
de que forma esse conhecimento se apresenta?
in which way does the knowledge present itself?
Conhecimento da operação.
So do we have to manage operations on a daily basis? For instance,
Gerencia conhecimento
there are companies that manage knowledge from the customer. So the customer's needs, what does he or she need? How we can attend the customer, how we can achieve and meet those expectations. So many companies apply KM in projects. There are new techniques, new methods, new solutions. So how we can capture and store that knowledge in projects.
Gestão do conhecimento e gestão do conhecimento.
So when we talk about knowledge management and more specifically organizational KM, what is that? What is that organizational knowledge? Is it connected to projects, for instance? Is it connected to operational processes? Is it in people?
Precisa identificar e reconhecer.
So we have to identify and recognize that knowledge. And the second question is, how does that knowledge present itself? Is it tacit or explicit? Is it documented or not? It is more practical or more conceptual. Knowing this defines the way we're going to work with such knowledge.
Responder essa questão.
So knowing those answers and knowing what kind of knowledge we're going to work on, it is of utmost importance. It is really important when we think of KM, for sure. We have other things to explore. I'm going to let Fernando to talk about this. So, Fernando, what do you think about that?
Eu concordo.
I see eye to eye with you.
Colocado, né? Só assim, alguns complementos para a gente.
I would like to make some comments.
Debater, né? Trocar algumas ideias, né? Como a gente está falando de conhecimento, né?
As we are talking about knowledge, I would say that knowledge transcends the frontier in the organizations. It transcends that barrier, the barrier of the company. So we have to know, of course, the supplier, the partner, and the customer. Of course, the community where the company is in, not only the knowledge that is in the organization itself. All of this is important for the business itself.
Da empresa, né, da organização que a gente está, né? Então, esse que conhecimento, onde...
So when we talk about which knowledge and where that knowledge is, when we ask those questions, they are not like solidified or fossilized. They are not surrounded by the walls of a company in a certain way. It is not only that. Let me give you an example. When we establish some partnerships, right? Research and development research. So when we do this, I would say that this kind of knowledge transcends that garden, that walled garden.
De organizações diferentes.
So it connects to different people, different organizations, and those people and organizations that have different cultures.
O André até já levantou a história do por onde eu começo.
André has already asked the question, so how can I begin? Where do I begin? So depending on those answers, of course, this is going to influence our decisions. So what knowledge should be managed? Where is that knowledge? How should we do it?
Os tipos, né, a forma, né, que ele se manifesta.
So we have to analyze the ways knowledge manifests itself. If it is tacit or explicit, right? So we are working with people's experience. Of course, we are working with people's lives.
Né, com métodos.
Dealing with methods, dealing with procedures. So what is really that knowledge that we want to manage? Which knowledge and where is it in reality? Sometimes knowledge is codified, which means that it can be accessed, it can be searched. Of course, that sometimes doesn't happen. That's why some people say that the great challenge of KM is tacit knowledge. Of course, because of its nature, its essence. So, and André, if you want to make some comments, explore other things. Can I comment on something? Sure, André, please. There's a very important question. Knowledge management is relatively new. I would say it is 20 years old. But when I compare KM to other areas, I would say it's really incipient compared to human resources, marketing, strategy, in other areas. So KM lacks clarity in a certain way. What is KM, right? So I would say that we have to explore what is organizational knowledge. So when we talk about managing the knowledge of the company, what we're talking about, the knowledge in the people themselves. Many programs begin because that knowledge is being lost, because people are leaving the company, for example. Is that knowledge we have to manage? Or is it the knowledge that is in processes, in routines, in procedures, in the way things are done? Or is it the knowledge which is in the productive chain, as Fernando has just mentioned, the suppliers, providers, logistic chain? So the question is, so what kind of knowledge that needs to be analyzed and taken care of? So if you're talking about knowledge from the people themselves, so the question is, so when the knowledge of one person belongs to the company, so what is individual knowledge and what is organizational knowledge? So Fernando's knowledge or somebody else's. Do they belong to SBGC, for instance?
Então, a gente precisa reconhecer essas.
That's why it's important to recognize those subtleties, those frontiers. And I would say the SBGC's secret lies on making knowledge transcend those frontiers. So knowledge that is turning to organizational, that is not individual or tacit, and making it explicit, organizational. So knowledge from the customer, when you know what the customer needs, and transform that into something that you can offer, a service, a product, something concrete. So you have to transform knowledge. So you have to transform it in many different ways. So doing that is an activity that is really important to KM. That's why it's really important to differentiate those aspects. Very nice, André. So I would say that Fernando's and André's opinions, I would say they strengthen something I believe. And what I believe is there is no recipe for KM. So there's no checklist in a certain way that were already made, that were previously made, like a system, for instance, or some kind of meeting, some kind of gathering that would be applied to all companies in a prescriptive way, in organizations as well. So what you're saying is that for each organization, for each institution, I believe that we should take care of where the knowledge is and how we want to handle that knowledge. And let me tell you something. Now, let's proceed to our next slide. So what to do and how to perform KM, how we can use that knowledge. So I have seen that some people here, they were a bit ahead, and if you have already voted, perfect. But if you haven't voted, we still have one question to open our conversation. So what do you think about that? What do I need to do? And how should I perform KM in my organization? So people are voting. Let me just share my presentation with the results. So as you can see, we have the results. It's really interesting. So managing new knowledge, yeah, they are symmetrical. They're really balanced, right? So to facilitate acquisition of a new knowledge and capacitating people, everything is symmetrical, balanced. And of course, they are mutually exclusive. That's really nice.
Interessante.
Interesting.
É bem reativo, né?
It's really reactive.
Ó, aquisição tá subindo.
Acquisition is going up.
Isso aí, tem que ser uma GC proativa, gente.
So we have to be proactive, right? Yeah. You have to be, or not, depending on your problem. Yeah, of course, depending on the business. Let's imagine something.
Não muda nunca, né?
If something that doesn't change, so let's retain it. But if you are working with technology, with a technological market, so you have to change it, right? For sure. So maybe that's not a differential. Yeah, that's it. So we can see people voting, and we can see the importance of stimulating such exchange, regardless of where you are. If it is standardized, it's a fixed operation, or maybe it's in a more dynamic situation. So it's important to exchange and sharing knowledge, for sure. Yes, sure. So when we talk about the development of knowledge, it's important to share, right? If you do not share knowledge, you cannot create it. That's right. So sharing is important for both aspects. So maybe 15 more seconds. Let's wait. And then we can continue with our chat.
Olha só, e daí a nossa aquisição de conhecimento.
So you see, our knowledge acquisition is down again. The exchange stimulus, it's high again. Yes. We have peace of mind because our audience, at least the ones who are here, they have a TI in KM. It's not the way it was some years ago. it is the knowledge repository, which is TI related, is not so strong as it was before. Yeah, this is a positive aspect. Yes, this is an interesting characteristic. So let's go back to our discussion, to our question. I would like to know what you, André and Fernando, what's your idea? What to do? How to do it? What do you understand by it? About these topics, these provocations.
Quer começar, Fernando?
Would you like to go first, Fernando? Yes, I'm going to start. After André. So, how to do it or what to do it? Sometimes we have to understand this is not to make knowledge management, it's something else. It's another methodology, other techniques that we have to use, so that we have to take care of knowledge. It is possible that KM is not the more adequate one. We have already discussed this before. In our workshop yesterday, we discussed a lot. For most people who are here, they took part yesterday. André was there also. Maybe it's not KM. So going back to the topic, only to be provocative, right, André? André likes to be very inclusive with KM, but I think that there are some issues in what to do and how to do it. And it's going to be connected, directed with the previous question. What knowledge? Where is it? So if we have exclusively tacit knowledge, entirely based in experience, and a group of experts who have more than 30 years of experience in a crescent technology, if it's this way, we need on one hand to share and teach young professionals who are starting. We have to use techniques and practices to do so. And these practices and techniques, they will be a stimulus for these professionals. And they will promote the application of those sharing of knowledge for these young people, for example. And the more experienced professionals have to observe and correct very promptly when mistakes happen. Sometimes we like to have a knowledge basis, and then we can have the idea to build content, to have a knowledge bank, so that people from everywhere they are, it can be in their offices, via mobile, on the other side of the world. Leandro is in Korea. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. He's been there for a short time. And then people can go to this content in a way. What do you think about my provocation, André? Tell me. This reminds me from the first question that we see often. Where do I start with my KM? Do I say that people should capture knowledge, should start doing? How can we do it? The result of our poll is very interesting, because after all, sharing knowledge is what people need. In organizations, it's needed, this knowledge sharing. When sharing circulates, we have this individual sharing, person to person, and then this becomes the organization knowledge, and then knowledge is shared among many people.
Assim, muitos
So it's
programas
very interesting and funny at the same time that many KM programs start with the second item, which is knowledge capture. And I'm going to risk a reading here.
as pessoas sabem que o conhecimento é importante, mas gerir o conhecimento dá
People
trabalho.
know the knowledge is important, but managing it is hard work.
Imediato.
And sometimes there isn't an immediate impact or an obvious and clear impact in the organization.
De cuidar do conhecimento.
And people will always only remember to take care of it when they are with the problem. And the problem is when this knowledge is going away, when people are leaving the organization. And then, oh my goodness, we need to capture and retain this knowledge in our organization. And many programs happen when this occur in their organization.
Isso porque
and why does this happen? I would risk saying that is because we have a high level of risk. It is worrying.
Do conhecimento.
And the ideal would be take care of knowledge. In the beginning, we need to stimulate the sharing of knowledge. So I'm going to connect my idea with Leandro's idea. There isn't a recipe that you go there and see how we do it. We used to represent KM with a cycle. These knowledge processes are in a cycle. Capture, share, acquisition, dissemination of knowledge, and access, use of knowledge. So which one is the entry point? How do we start? Is there a pre-established order to do all those things? So as Leandro said, it's very difficult to do it, and every moment demands something different. So it's important to acknowledge.
O que está acontecendo com o conhecimento?
Acknowledge what is happening to knowledge. Where is the problem? Where is the gap? Is it too concentrated on a small number of people or some areas?
Indo embora da organização.
Or is knowledge going away with people who are leaving? Are there lots of new knowledge being created outside with suppliers, for example? We need to bring this outside knowledge also. And we have to perceive this knowledge movement.
Transformação do conhecimento.
This process is the knowledge transformation, which I talked about in the beginning. What are we going to do with knowledge? We have to capture, transform, make it circulate from one place to another. And it has to circulate from the more experienced one for the less experienced one, or from the center to the end, to the branches, to the ones who are in direct contact with the customer. So what can we do with knowledge? We need to see this process and we need to make it circulate, to make it move. So let us talk about what we said, what André said in the beginning. So why do people try to formalize and capture knowledge many times? So from my perspective, this is the fastest way to show some progress, especially in more dynamic organizations where we have to show fast results. So this is a way that works at the end, because it's the way that we can have the repositories, the files, And sometimes you didn't have the result that you thought, but it is a way to go. And taking advantage on my speech, there are many questions, many topics that we need to talk about. And now, what is very interesting to say, which Alberto Alves Marques said, which is, where's knowledge in a digital society? Where is it? In the computing digital society. Where is, well, is it everywhere? It is everywhere. All society. This is the knowledge management challenge, because knowledge is everywhere. It is digital in the repositories, it is in the social media, that presentation that we share on WhatsApp and other ways, that video that we liked a lot and had an insight and it shared with the team.
Aquela dica que o colega passou pra gente.
It is on that hint that our co-worker talked to us in a conference, because everyone is remote, and it was not recorded, but it was shared, and we commented in that meeting. All of this is knowledge circulating. This is why we need to realize in what way this knowledge is. Is it a video? Is it a PDF, a presentation that was shared? Is it that comment, that story that someone told you in a meeting, that customer insight? And how we work with this knowledge, the way it is.
So I would say that the great challenge of a digital society is the following. The first one is that knowledge manifests itself in many different ways. So we have multiplied the ways that knowledge is spread. So there is not only in print knowledge, we also have other ways. It can be recorded, we have audio files, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. Now, the second point is this kind of knowledge spreads really fast. It spreads in a decentralized way and uncontrolled way as well. So before digitalization and virtualization, the processes were more manageable in a certain way. So when the processes were more physical, they were easier to be monitored and controlled. With the advent of digitalization of conversation, of processes, and of course, digitalization of knowledge, knowledge spreads in a faster way and it spreads in a more uncontrolled way. So it's tough to monitor such knowledge. So we need new techniques, new methods in order to follow such dynamics. So I think we can continue, we can speed our warming up section a lot. So we have talked about it, but I would like to make this explicit. Is there a sequence? So why do I perform KM and why do we do it? And what is the intention? For what? So I would like to hear from you. So I think Priscilla has a question that is connected to we have been discussing before. So critical knowledge in organizations, is it a good way for the implementation of KM? I'm going to give you an example in a second, but let me talk a bit about it.
Eu acho que então, o desafio da GC é que não tem uma receita pronta.
I would say that the big challenge for KM is that there is no magical recipe. It depends on the organization, depends on the moment the organization is living. So I would say that in a certain moment, the corporation has a specific dismissal plan, but we have to work on retention, on capturing. At a different moment, we have lots of knowledge that is documented, lots of lessons that have been learned, best practices that were classified, organized, and those things are available to everyone, but people are not using those things. And the reason is because people do not know what it is, how we can access it, and other reasons. So the priority is the access. So the priority is finding those things. So people that work with KM has to understand this. What is the bottleneck now? What is the challenge right now? So do I need to stimulate sharing and exchange? Okay, so let's choose techniques connected to that and facilitate the flow of knowledge. At a different moment, for instance, the main demand will be the acquisition of external knowledge. So let's do it. So let's perform prospection, benchmarking. Let's bring people from outside, experts, suppliers, customers, and those people can talk to us. And by talk to us, we can get that knowledge to the company. So we have to understand the moment of the organization. And by doing this, we have to choose the best techniques that will solve that need. Fernando? So when we talk about why and for what, those questions help people to define that sequence. So where you can start from and those kinds of things. I would say that KM is a non-core activity, right? Which means is a means to a problem that's going to have a minimal impact in the organization, or it could be used as a way to contribute in a way to reach and achieve objectives, business goals. So there are many approaches that we can have. We can have a more simplistic perspective. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, a bad perspective.
Não ter relevância, tá, gente?
I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about management. So if I have a business challenge that is clear and strategic, I need to have a strategic management of knowledge. I need to have something more elaborate concerning KM. So, concerning Priscilla's question, addressing her question, of course, that question makes sense. So, we have to understand the essential kinds of knowledge and why are they essential. So, what is the link between the knowledge and the objective of the organization, the government, for instance?
Trabalho, né, de gestão.
That's why it's important to have a KM work. Of course, we can have KM initiatives, for instance, that don't establish that need of identifying knowledge or other things. Maybe we use our gut feeling, what we feel, right? So, for instance, let's imagine the following situation. My company has an amount of employees and lots of employees, they have left. So, oh my God, so I'm going to lose knowledge, right? So I haven't mapped knowledge or have done other procedures. But of course, by using this sensation, this gut feeling, I can use KM initiatives that are aimed at issues that are emerging, of course, or at other problems that we are going to deal with. And we're going to deal with those problems on a daily basis, which is part of the company. So when we say that there is no magical recipe, this is connected to understanding the concept of what is happening right now. What am I doing? Where am I? What is the environment I'm working at? And of course, this has to do with collective intelligence.
competitiva, às vezes.
It is connected to competitive intelligence, market intelligence. And we need to understand where we are. So, if we identify a problem concerning knowledge in a specific place, right? And that problem doesn't have an impact on our business, for instance. So, of course, we can act on that. KM can be useful, right? So we can use it.
Mas, né, com certa cautela.
But of course, we have to be cautionary, I'm sorry.
Que impacta, né?
But if we have a very deep challenge, a very bad problem that impacts the development of the company, it's going to revolutionize the market we are in. So, of course, we're going to have elements that are better structured in order to build our KM system. KM systems can be big, they can be complex, of course, and maybe they would not be successful. Maybe those systems can be really small, really simple, but they can generate a huge impact on the organization. Or maybe just a part of the KM system that can solve our daily problems, and that's fine, no problem.
Entender, né, e saber quais são.
But in some cases, understanding and knowing what those kinds of knowledge that are critical is really important, right? Okay, so this is connected to the topic we're going to discuss now, which is the model of reference. So, so we have been noticing that there are many different ways of activating that knowledge, or in other words, applying that knowledge, as Fernando mentioned. So it could be a system that is well structured, or maybe a system that is more dynamic, depending on the need. So what is the importance of having a model for organizations? So now we're going to establish a connection between those things and the model themselves. So why do we have a model? Why do we need a model?
Mas por que a gente precisa?
So, why do we need a model? So I think we need that model to organize our ideas. So we want to make clear and to show what we need and what we need to pay attention to in order to implement KM, in order to make KM happen successfully.
A gente falou de conhecimento, a gente falou de...
So, when we're talking about knowledge and how we can apply that knowledge, right? But now I would like to establish a connection with something that Fernando brought up. So, connecting KM to strategy, right? It is a very important element in the model that we have tackled at the beginning. So, the first question that people ask is the following. So, where do I start from? So when people ask me this question, I will ask another question. So why do you need KM?
Esse alerta que o Fernando fez, que é...
So that's something that Fernando warned us. So you have to align KM to strategy. So what results you want to have in the future? Just avoiding the loss of people. Okay. So that's a very important objective for sure.
Todos são igualmente iguais.
But if we take into account knowledge that's being lost, do you have any kind of knowledge that is more important than the others? So that's why it's important to know that. So I need to see what we can use knowledge for and retain it. What kind of knowledge do we have to keep it? Knowing that knowledge is being lost, and what do I expect from that? So, for instance, Leandro has traveled to Korea. He's in Korea now, right? So he he's with knowledge now, right? So knowledge is with him now. So what kind of knowledge should we have in order to get things going here? So, so the person that is moving away, it's very tough to retain all this knowledge. So what kind of knowledge can be retained in the small amount of time that I have to do this? So it's not, maybe it's not so important to retain that knowledge concerning purchasing processes and budgeting, for instance, or maybe when you monitor the time of the team. So maybe we could retain his knowledge concerning the market and clients, trends, for instance, trends that are happening in the market nowadays. So we are going to give more focus on that aspect. So the model was able to identify those elements. That's why it's important to look at those elements and organize them in a way that we can map what we need, of course, and try to connect those things in order to make things having more sense.
Fernando, would you like to comment anything? Can I pass it on? Yes, Leandro, you can pass it on. I was in the chat on YouTube exchanging some ideas with them. Oh, cool. So, let's say, I'm going to say more visually now. The model has some bases that support the work. The first one is that knowledge management demands a facilitating environment. There isn't a preset sequence. It can be from anywhere. So knowledge demands a prosperous environment so that it's be able to grow in the organization. So as it was said, knowledge is not the end, it's a means to support the business. So with our knowledge practices, we can help the business, and it can be any kind of organization, non-profit, third sector, normal business. It doesn't matter which one. Knowledge management is only going to make sense if it brings results. So if the end of my organization is not done, then KM has no purpose at all. I would like to know your opinion about it, about these different fundamentals and dimensions.
Ligou.
André, okay, he has turned on the microphone. So let's talk a little bit about the history of this model. We have started working some years ago. We started in 2013. Using benchmarking with some companies that have a KM program. Each company has presented their programs, what they did, what were the elements, what are the practices that they used to do. And then we started identifying what the successful KM program have in common, what works well, what are the best practices in the KM. So what you showed, it was a little bit early in the conversation. Knowledge management doesn't work on an empty place. We do not only take care of the KM cycle and all of those phases, capture, sharing, etc. So the more successful programs have knowledge management that helped the business to work better.
Mais
They
consistentes.
help the organization to deliver more consistent projects. They use it to capacitate people better so that the projects were faster. They could reuse solutions that were used along with the project. So there were successful programs and they could contribute clearly so that the organization could be more successful. Not only that, knowledge management happened in an environment that made KM easier. So these are topics difficult to be perceived, but the organizational culture of some companies that had a mature KM program,
Valorizava o
their
conhecimento.
culture valued knowledge, and learning also, and conversation, discussion, sharing between people. Then we started realizing what are the things that make the knowledge management work. Why do, for example, the same lessons learned in one company works and not on the other one? So this environment that makes things easy, this facilitating environment, started being discussed early. So this is how we organized. So in the first time we benchmarked in 13, we had a structure to observe everything. So we considered knowledge strategy, if the company had a KM department or no, and what were the team competences.
Criou o seu próprio conceito.
If the company had a KM concept, or if they started their own KM concept, how they had the decision-making process, if they had their own indexes, and why KM were done and how they did it.
Quais eram as práticas, né?
And also, which were the practices they did in the organization, and which processes they use, what kind of practices. And also, what were their supporting technologies? And then we observed very detailed, in a very detailed way.
Comunidade em si, né? Enxergar
we did all this so that the community itself could see all these details.
Da cultura, né?
Not only regarding the culture of the organization, which is in this facilitating environment, and also in the business processes, where KM supports the business. I'm not sure if you remember then, but in 2013, many of the programs had KM as a facilitating thing. KM contributed innovation. Yes, and this is one of the questions we have here. Yes, in any given moment, we changed the name. It was maturity and innovation because of these. And many companies had this link. It was very clear. You know, one of them, it was about innovation. KM should support the business, the processes and everything. And one of the challenges was innovation. So the KM was this link in order to make innovation work. And it was something very clear. The areas, the departments didn't fight between them. It was very clear, very easy. And this is something we have observed also. Yeah, very cool. So this was Jesuina's question. Can KM be an instrument to innovation and how? And this is how it's done, right? KM has the way to make it innovative. So many of you was here, Dudu, Jesuína, André, myself. Okay, raise your hands on the chat, everyone. Só que Fabiana da Natura, Fátima. There were many people there. Some of them are still in KM, or the other no. And another topic. Can I add something, please?
Acho que vale dizer que assim
So it's worth saying that this model is not something revolutionary. We didn't magically made a trick.
Na coleta de dados
As Fernando said, when in data collection, there were the elements that we were looking for, and the more mature organization have their KM models also.
Que eu deixaria aqui,
and the tip that I could say is that it's worth it to have KM in a more consistent way. You can think in a KM model for your organization. And what is it? It's when we put all these pieces together, which pieces we are going to put together and how, in order that it makes sense for our organization. And why do the organizations have the KM? It's a way to show these connections, the knowledge, what we are doing with it, and how it helps the operation, the business, the delivery, and how, which pieces I can assemble correctly so that these practices can be done. So I have to see all the pieces and assemble them in a way it makes sense. And by doing it, we can add value. It is tangible, these relationships. KM is something that is not tangible. It's only a little tangible. So by doing this way, it helps a lot. Yes, it's not something fixed. It's dynamic. And in our 2020 version, everyone is complaining we are talking only about 2013. So let's talk about 2020. You can assemble all the variables according to your KM problems. And the guys are reminding me here, still talking about model. This morning, we had a model that has to do with this facilitating environment. We had a trusting environment that enables sharing, using all these techniques in this morning. And it was very nice too.
So I think it's worth exploring what do we mean by each of those levels. I think we can explore those levels. Of course, the three of us, we have some experience in KM, right? But people that are new to the KM world, how does that person understand when we talk about facilitating environment? That's why I would like to explore that dimension, okay? And I would like to ask you, so what do you understand by culture and elements of management, infrastructure? In a brief way, in some words, what do you think about that?
Bom, cultura, ela
É tudo.
é tudo, né?
Culture is everything.
Influencia, né, o comportamento das pessoas.
Culture influences people's behavior.
Que as pessoas acreditam ou não acreditam, né?
People can believe in that or not. Sometimes culture facilitates things and sometimes create barriers. It creates barriers. I mean, in my case, I'm a researcher of that topic, right? So I would say that it's really important to understand organizational culture for everything, not only KM. Of course, when we talk about innovation management, so how does a company that works with innovation, how can this company not understand that, right? So understanding culture is really important. So we have to know the values that should be added or values that should be got rid of. So when we talk about elements in management, it's a very complex topic. So it depends on human resources. It depends on the system of the organization. Infrastructure has to do with physical aspects, so chairs, tables. Let me just interrupt you for a second, Fernando. There was a question here in the chat. So in the complex situation that educational institutions have been going through, so how can what do you think, in fact, about KM helping in creating a new culture in those institutions? And I believe that this doesn't apply only to educational institutions, but I would say to all kinds of institutions. So how can this guiding of culture can help the institution? André, would like to say something? So in our model, we understand culture as a context that guides other things. So we work with what is possible, right? So culture is a group of things that we should do, things that we should not do. And this cannot be applied to organizations, but to the community as a whole. However, culture changes as time goes by. It evolves. So the question was about schools, right? But we can talk about organizations as a whole. KM brings new practices, new routines, new habits as well. So let's imagine the following. If you create a practice that you want to share best practices, okay? So, for instance, teachers, let's establish a monthly meeting and chat about challenges that we have in our classes, some technical solutions for those challenges, all right? For instance, some trends that we have been observing in the market, changes that have been happening, behavioral changes as well in people. So because isolation, so remote work, right? So that was a shock to teachers. So how can you teach remotely? Okay, so how are you doing that? So what technique are you using? So I cannot see if people are paying attention or not, students are engaged or not. So what do you do? So when we introduce new routines and new practices, you are able to influence the culture. It can make some adjustments towards bigger sharing. So this influence happens in two ways. Culture shapes what can be done and what cannot be done. And at the same time, when you introduce different behaviors and different practices, for instance, you can make something acceptable that was not acceptable before, or maybe something that was not done because people were not used to it.
Nesse sentido, a cultura pode gentilmente.
So this way, culture and KM, in fact, can influence culture slightly. I believe so.
Isso tem a ver pouco com o professor Neri falou ontem, né?
This is connected, I think, to what Professor Neri's comment yesterday. The world has changed, and some people haven't noticed that. That's why I believe that KM can facilitate that process. So KM practices can make people understand those changes.
Começar a nascer a partir desse.
So this means that this cultural change can happen because of those macro changes that are happening.
Então acho que nesse sentido a GC pode ajudar bastante.
So that's why I believe that in this way KM can be really useful to make people understand what is happening.
Entender, né? Porque que não pode ser mais.
Not only that, people can be able to understand why things cannot be as they were before. So people have to understand why. People have to work differently. Why do people have to share, right?
Não pode ter mais essa linha de aula, né? Em filinhas igual professor.
Why can't we have the traditional way of teaching and learning in rows in classrooms? So it's no use just talking about it. People have to see the meaning in those practices. So that's why KM can be really useful and initiate the building of a new culture. May I add something, Leandro? Sure, please.
Eu falei, Fernando complementou agora, né, que a GC pode influenciar a cultura, mas...
So, Fernando mentioned that KM can influence culture. Yes, that's true. And how culture is changing in schools, inside the classroom, organizations, society as a whole. Fernando has mentioned Professor Neri's talk yesterday, right? So when we talk about social media, having smartphones every single time. So by having those cell phones, young people, kids, they have a different dynamic in their minds. So they bring a new culture to the classroom. That's why schools have to adapt themselves to this new culture. There's a new learning culture. And this doesn't mean that, and of course, this means that the teacher is not the holder of truth, of course. So knowledge, not only books, of course, but it is on YouTube. Knowledge is also on Instagram, and so on and so forth. So in organizations, when we have lots of millennials, they bring a different culture. It's a more horizontal-like kind of conversation. They try to experiment new things. They try to do different things. They question a lot. So this creates the opportunity for different flows of knowledge. That's nice. And everything that is said is the basis for the creation of new initiatives. So, as you can see here in the model, the facilitating environment can also be the foundation for the creation of approaches, processes, and practices in KM. So I'd like to hear from you the difference among approaches, processes, and practices in KM. André, would you like to talk about this, please? There are lots of things to discuss and talk about when we imagine KM, right? But as I've said previously, the model wants to shed some light on the fundamental pieces.
Duas coisas são importantes para a gente desenhar
There are two important things for us to design a KM project.
Uma iniciativa de que a gente chamou aí de abordagens e processos.
So we call this approaches and processes. So when we talk about KM processes, they are things that we do with knowledge. So KM processes, they are basically capturing, retention, organizing, dissemination, acquisition, and etc.
Como que a gente organiza essas coisas? Como a
So
gente...
how can we organize such things? How can we link those things? We usually understand this in a cyclical way. So first you acquire, then you organize it, following, and you spread it, so on and so forth, right? And then you use it. So each company, I would say, has a different way of understanding this.
Não tem ciclo bonitinho.
In practice, the cycle is not so beautiful. It varies according to the moment, right? So this is something very important for us to pay attention to. So what we do with knowledge and the sequence, its sequence.
A empresa querer fazer tudo ao mesmo tempo.
Some companies, they make a bad mistake, so they want to do things at the same time. So at the same time, how do I retain it? How do I spread it? Just in a single time. So it's very tough to perform all those things simultaneously. It's much easier to begin from a place, right? Or maybe the biggest issue. Let's imagine retention, for instance. So let's begin from retention. So by having enough content, let's disseminate it, or maybe let's make its access easy. So now that we have this knowledge, we have retained it and we use it, and we apply it to our routine. So now we need to create new knowledge. So now let's do it. So identifying those processes is really important. Another thing is the approaches, which have to do with the way knowledge is presented. Is it tacit or explicit? Is it easier to be codified, or I would say it's easier to get that knowledge in practical terms by using it, by observing, or by talking, right? How do we get that knowledge? How do we transfer that knowledge? How can I make this knowledge tangible? So there are some approaches devoted to content, to explicit knowledge. There are some approaches that are connected to conversation and exchange, and of course connected to stimuli. There are some approaches that deal with knowledge that is in the company. So I want to guarantee that everybody knows about that. There are some approaches that are devoted to bringing knowledge from the outside. So on and so forth. So by combining processes and approaches, depending on the situation, you can have the third element of the model, which are the practices. So what is KM in reality? Basically, they are practices that get together. They connect knowledge, the way knowledge is presented, to be more explicit. If it's more tacit, it is connected to creation, and that's it.
There's a question, Marília asked here. Doesn't this practice have a problem in the metrics? How can we do in the benefits day, for example? So we need to organize KM in short, medium, and long term. So you deal with the short-term problem, but you cannot stop there. You cannot stop there. If there is some knowledge concentrated in a place, so first you deal with that. And then on a second moment, for example, you have to acquire new knowledge. Or if you need to have the retention at that moment, you take care of the retention and do not stop there. You have to keep going. You have to think in the access of the organization or using this knowledge, for example.
A gente trabalha a gestão do conhecimento em níveis.
We work KM in strategic level, tacit level, and operational level. In the strategic one, you have to work the whole cycle. You have to, all the levels have to be working. You have to transfer, share, retention, all of them. But on the tacit and operational levels, it can have a different urgency, and there are operational indexes, strategic indexes that can help you with that. And there are some questions here about leadership and the board working with everyone. And there is the business alignment. And there are many questions here. One is Rosana Cunha. Is it possible to have a KM process without the direction being involved? And how can we show the organization the importance of KM so that the leadership is involved? Then we have to align the business. All the people in the organization have to be aligned. And how can we work? Okay, leadership in general has more to do with a facilitating environment. Anyway,
estava falando, né?
This is what we were talking about before. Leadership is needed. And if we have a relevant impact in the organization, the leadership has to be involved. But if it is a minor initiative, something small maybe, okay, leadership doesn't need to be involved because it is a smaller area and the impact is not going to be so great. But the model itself is very dynamic. We can work the 3 dimensions at the same time. And it's very interesting to see the KM strategies, because we have to look for the alignment. This has to be the goal in the KM as a business with a corporation strategy. It doesn't make sense to have a KM goal, which is create knowledge. And in the KM initiative, we only have knowledge retention initiatives, for example. You see that these levels do not talk. They are not connected. So this alignment is very interesting because there is the strategy involved with it. We have to understand why we are doing KM. What part of the business is going to be impacted with the KM contribution? And why everything is happening? Why does the organization need KM? So knowledge is delayed, for example, and we have to innovate. And by doing this, we can identify the executive leadership. Who is the one that responds for the department? Who has to deliver the results?
Estratégica de maneira adequada.
And if we can have this strategy done in a proper way, everyone is going to support KM.
Nas tomadas de decisões.
Everyone is going to help with the decision-making process. Everyone is going to help with budget, if it is the case.
E também vai nos ajudar, né, a encontrar os conhecimentos relevantes depois.
And everyone is going to help find the relevant knowledge to be used. So they play a very important role in the implementation, maintenance, and evolution of KM. So Davi has asked a question which is related to this. How can internal communication impact on KM? Do you have any example? And I'm going to take the liberty to say yes. Not exactly in the communication area. It can be the end of the KM.
O pato bota ovo maior do que a galinha e não sabe cacarejar.
So, as I said before, if you have a very good problem, you can't sell it, we have a big problem. So we, in the KM department, we have to be careful. We have to promote the KM. We have to advertise our department.
Essa visibilidade.
Because if our department doesn't have this visibility, there's the risk that you are performing an excellent work and no one perceives that they are directly affected by it. It's something like the sewer system, for example, or electricity. We only see that this is so important for us when we don't have it.
Assusta as pessoas, né, Lê?
And people also get scared with this common problem. So when an employee is leaving, and then, oh my goodness, we have to retain knowledge. And then people see that we have to do KM. Okay, you are going to retire. I need your knowledge. And then the person doesn't understand, oh my goodness, why are you saying this? So this happens especially when the KM team and the organization needs to know how they have to, what posture they have to do in this sense when an employee is going to retire. And let me say, it is very important to know how to communicate and know how to have KM department acting, but I'm going to say my part. Many times the KM doesn't have what to communicate. So to be aligned with this strategy, we have to deliver value to the business and to the areas that use the KM services. Many people don't understand our department. They see us as a weight that ends up annoying them. And this is not what it is. There is when the strategies are directing KM in what is important for the organization, and then the people are going to see our value. The alignment with strategy is going to happen at the end of our work and then in the operational level as well. For example, there is a mentorship program because we need to retain knowledge and transfer knowledge for a more experienced employee. There's no point to have a mentorship on a kind of knowledge which is not strategic. You are going to transfer some experience which is not relevant for the business. It is going to be more relevant, another kind of mentorship, in a kind of knowledge which is strategic for the organization. If it is technical one, market one, managerial, anyway. And then I'm going to link with the question that Priscilla asked. We have to know which ones are the strategic knowledge for the organization. And these ones will help KM to add value to the business. Lessons learned, for example. We are going to deal with lessons learned in projects.
Mostrar resultado com GC.
And when I'm willing to show results, we end up capturing each lessons learned we have learned in the projects. And then there are lots of information that are not useful. So we have to be clear what kind of relevant knowledge is going to generate impact in the project. Which ones are going to make a difference in the delivery? What kind of lessons learned they are going to make a difference in the delivery? So if it is delivery, we have to see the lessons learned regarding time. So when I'm going to adopt determined practice, I have to pay attention if the value is clear. Because if it is clear, the value, it will be easier to show why KM is important. It gets easier to implement new initiatives in the KM department. So everyone is this way. Implement, show, build the culture of the organization. These are details, but they are very important. They make a difference. This is sure. We have a minute to end our session. If we can add more 5 minutes, because we have many questions, but considerations. There are many things that we have commented since the beginning. And where can I apply KM? And there isn't a proper order.
O modelo de referência, ele pode ser usado para fazer...
The reference model can be used to have a diagnosis.
Você vai implementar uma prática.
A reference model can be used when you are going to implement practice and when you are going to define the strategy. Eduardo asked a very nice question, and it's worth it to say.
Mas
it's going to be very brief. How do we consider the differential in the SBGC model related to compared to the other ones that exist? Well, we are very suspicious to talk about it, but
nosso veio da rua, não veio de livro.
Ours came from the practice, the daily practice. It's what everyone is doing.
92% é da rua, tá?
92% is based on practice. It's what people do.
Então eu acho que isso
people actually do.
É grande diferencial em relação.
And this is a great differential related to some models. I haven't seen all of them, but some. I could say our model is better because we know it. I wouldn't say that our model is the best one, because every model has its utility, its use. My suggestion is that one model can make things easier. As I said, see which ones are the critical pieces and how we can see them. It's going to help us very well to see the KM department working and the KM practice working. So we can shorten the way, we can advertise our ideas better. It can be the SBGC model or others. Other kinds. Or the model that you know and you are comfortable with. But please know your model very well. Know the pieces, play with them, assemble them in a very nice way, because this is going to be very easy for the process itself. It's going to make communication, discussion easier. So where do we start? Okay, there are these pieces here. Which one are we going to deal with first? So in the SBGC model, only to making what you said more focused, SBGC can help you. The Fraunhofer one, you have to go to Germany. No, now being serious. Our model,
ajudar vocês, né?
We can help you with our model. We can help you with a course, with a practice. Yeah, correct. And I would like to invite everyone, if you are an SBGC member, you have access to the digital format of the reference guide. If you are interested, you can become a member so that you can have access to this content, to our guide. This is the invitation so that you know the material.
De 2020 foi revisado no último
The
ano.
2020 edition was reviewed, and this is a constant work that we have. Our model is going to evolve. This is natural.
A gente fica capturando novas tendências,
And we keep capturing new tendencies, new suggestions. And if you have any suggestions related to our model, you are very welcome to share it and discuss it with us. And in 2020, we are going to have a new edition, that's for sure. And everyone is going to participate. And you are even more welcome if you apply our model and give us a feedback so that we can have a fact to see how the model was used. There are many questions, but unfortunately, the time is up.
Telegram.
Leandro, please post on Telegram the questions. We can answer them writing or with audios. Okay, I'll do it. So I would like to thank everyone for participating. Also the interpreters, which are working a lot so that they make this viable for the non-Portuguese speakers. I would like to say thank you for André and Fernando. They were very enlightening. And I would like to say thank you for the organization, for doing this in a very challenging and atypical moment in our society. And again, I would like to invite you to know our model and keep asking questions. As soon as possible, we are going to answer all of them. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Obrigado, André. Obrigado, Lê.
Thank you, André, Leandro. See you soon.